So this evening we're looking at Psalm 123. So let me ask you this evening, are you good with patience? And you're right there, good with patience, when you have to wait and wait. When things don't turn out the way that you wanted and perhaps you have to lower your expectations. When people let you down or when circumstances seem against you. You good at patience? The dictionary definition defines it as the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, problems or suffering without becoming annoyed or anxious. Yes, even as you read it, there's that chuckle, isn't there? Because you just think, yes, I hear the words that say, be patient, dear. The ability to endure difficult circumstances. The ability to persevere in the face of delay. The ability to tolerate provocation without responding with anger. We live in a very impatient world. I can order something online, I can pay for it online, and I can get it delivered tomorrow. Or even better, I can go and collect it today. If I don't have to answer to anything, I just got to get my phone out of my pocket, type in a question, and there's the answer straight for me. So why can't life be like that? And if we're honest, we're kind of pushed to sky-high expectations of what life could or should be like. And obviously to complain when that's not being met. And if we're honest, sometimes our frustrations and our impatience are with God himself. Why aren't things happening at my church? Why can't our church be like the one down the road? Why is this happening to me? Why did God allow that to happen? Why hasn't God answered my prayers about this? Well, the songs of Ascent were written, several of them were written when the psalmist is facing difficult circumstances, troubles, frustrations, and at the same time, he shows us something of how to get a spiritual perspective on what is happening and how to respond in a godly way. And so in tonight's psalm, the psalmist is waiting. He's waiting patiently, he's waiting on God, and hopefully through it, we can learn something from him. So we look at Psalm 123, and we'll glance over to Psalms 124 and 129, which we read earlier. So three simple things to look at this evening. Firstly, there's desperate times. Secondly, there's dependable help. And thirdly, there's dependent expectation. So firstly then, there are desperate times. He says in verse 3 and 4, he says, have mercy on us, Lord, have mercy on us, for we have endured no end of contempt. We've endured no end of ridicule from the arrogant, of contempt from the proud. So Psalm 123 is a song from when you're at the end of your rope, when you can't take any more, when you feel you've just about had enough. When you say, I've had it up to here, and you can't take any more. So where do we find that? Well, you look in verses 3 and 4, and you look at the psalmist's words, particularly when he uses this phrase, no end. We've received no end of contempt. We've endured no end of ridicule from the arrogant. Now that phrase, no end, if you have an older version, will be translated as something like greatly filled, which is the more literal translation. The NIV is translated in a way that perhaps helps it to read a little easier. Greatly filled. Well, the word filled is the word that means sated. You're sated when you've eaten well and you've had enough and you feel full up. You're full, you're sated. Except here it's greatly filled. What we would describe in the Whiteley household as full up and fit to bust. You just couldn't eat another thing. You're greatly filled. Except that this isn't about food. This is about ridicule and contempt. I've had enough. I can't take any more, he says, of contempt. I can't take any more of ridicule from the arrogant. He says, I'm at the end of my tether, he might say. I've had it up to here. Contempt derived from the word to despise. So we've been greatly filled with contempt, he says, being made to feel that you're worthless, that you're beneath consideration. The same word is repeated from verse 3 into verse 4 as if to underline the point. Then it's about ridicule, scoffing, mocking, contemptuous, dismissive. I just can't take any more, says the psalmist. You been there? I certainly have. Times when you feel your faith just can't cope anymore, when you can't take another thing. Times when you've just about had enough. Times when you desperately want to know and to feel God's love, and yet all you seem to hear is the devil whispering in your ear that you're worthless and your faith is worthless. It may relate to people in some way, as it probably was in these psalms. But circumstances can weigh you down just as much, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. But it actually gets worse. You look over into Psalm 124, which we read in verses 1 to 5. Pictures of a raging torrent sweeping you away. Poetic language describing times when you just feel completely overwhelmed. Or turn the page to Psalm 129 and look at the picture in verse 3. Ploughmen have ploughed my back and made their furrows long. That's quite a description, isn't it? You can imagine it. It's almost as if there am I lying in the dirt, face down, and someone's coming along with their oxen and plough and driving it over my back. That total disregard, that humiliation, that pain, searing pain that is left behind by what they do. So why is this here? What are we looking at this for this evening? Is this just sort of leave us depressed as we go out the door with circumstances of life? Well, the fact is that there are times, I guess, when all of us will either have felt that way in the past or will feel it at some way in the future. And if you're like me, that's a problem, because you think somehow good Christians shouldn't think like that, and particularly good Christians shouldn't feel like that. I have to say, over my years as a Christian, I've found the songs of Ascent to be a real encouragement. As you look at them, just looking and seeing the fact that others have felt the way that I have has been a huge relief to me. It's a huge relief because you look at it and think, well, I'm not the odd one out. I'm not alone. Someone else has been there too. I'm not alone. And the fact that God has recorded such things in the Bible tells us that he knows and he understands. He knows what it's like for you and to me to live in a fallen world. He knew the distress of the psalmist that which he looked at in Psalm 120 as he longs for peace and wholeness, and yet he tells us that he senses distress and he looks around and just sees sin and violence. He knows the times when we're at the end of our tethers, as the psalmist is in Psalm 123. And he knows your situation this evening, and from this you can say, well, the Lord must know, he must understand, he must know what I'm facing. We looked at Psalm 122 last Sunday evening. Remember, we said peace and purpose and destiny, peace and belonging, peace and wholeness. But Psalm 123 reminds us that we're not home yet. Even with all God's blessings in Christ, we taste trouble and scorn and contempt. We feel at our wits' end, and we must journey on in the spiritual pilgrimage that is life. So firstly, there's desperate times. But secondly, you see here, dependable help. There's desperate times, but there's dependable help. He says in verse 1, I lift my eyes to you who sit enthroned in the heavens. And then we read in Psalm 124 and verse 8, our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. The Lord hadn't been on our side, he says in that psalm, but he was, and he'd say, our help is in the name of the Lord. I lift my eyes, says the psalmist in Psalm 123. That's becoming a sort of recurring theme in the Psalm of Ascents. We saw it in Psalm 121. as they made their way on the pilgrimage and lifted their eyes towards Jerusalem and then looked higher again to see beyond their circumstances, to see their great sovereign protector. And we saw it again in Psalm 122. It doesn't actually use those words, but we saw them effectively lifting their eyes to what is to come, lifting their eyes to the purpose and destiny of life. And so here again, I lift my eyes to you who sit enthroned in heaven. A Christian has someone to turn to in times of trouble. Everyone goes through trouble, but a Christian has got someone to turn to. There's dependable help. And the problem is that too often we're looking down. We're looking down at our circumstances rather than looking up and lifting our eyes to heaven with true faith. Midweek we looked at Nehemiah's prayer, and Bob asked us the question, how big is your God? If you're like me, you thought, well, probably too small. Not that God's too small, but my view of God is too small. I lift my eyes, he says, to you who sit enthroned in heaven. Our God is the God who rules over everything. He's in heaven. He rules over the big things. He rules over the little things. We've been reading Jeremiah lately. It's a bit of a depressing read. But one of the impressions it's left me with is how God is in control of the destiny of nations, the big things of life. The nations that will come and go that look so imposing are but for a time in God's purposes. And we see Jeremiah's predictions, and you can see in history how those were fulfilled. But at the other end of the scale, we looked a few weeks ago at Psalm 139 and saw how God knows all about little me in my circumstances. But God also has a purpose. He rules over everything with a purpose. He's not detached and afar off. He says, I lift my eyes to you. God can be known. I can draw help from him. Isaiah 57 and verse 15 puts it like this. This is what the high and exalted one says. I live in a high and holy place, but also with the one who is contrite and lowly in spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite. I lift my eyes, he says, to you who's enthroned in heaven. God is not afar off. God is near. God is there to give you strength in your difficulties. But also, it implies that God knows best. You see, here he is. I lift my eyes, he says. He doesn't lift his eyes to someone who rules as a tyrant. He's looking as to someone who can help, to a God who is good, to a God, therefore, who must know best. So often we struggle with that. And so often, effectively, we're saying to God, look, actually, I know best, and I could have done a better job than you have done here. That's essentially what Job ended up saying. You remember a few weeks ago we reminded ourselves of Job, but it's worth a reminder. We said that the book of Job isn't so much about suffering as it is about faith, the struggle of faith, the battle for faith. Job, will you trust me? God is effectively saying to him. And as Job struggles towards the end of the book, he effectively says to God that he could have done a much better job and God really had better explain himself. And so from chapter 38, as God speaks to him, he just effectively asks him a series of questions. And as you look at those questions, you can kind of fill in the blanks to make some very plain but unspoken lessons. And so God starts by effectively saying, well, okay, when you made the world, what was your plan then? You've clearly got a better plan with me. Share with me. What was your plan when you made the world? Oh, okay, so you weren't there. Well, let's try something else then. So as you govern the world, how do you do it? Perhaps you give me some tips so I can learn from you. Oh, so you don't govern the world then, but you know best. You know best. Well, tell me then, how do you order the stars and the universe at the one end and the details of the world at the other, both at the same time? Oh, so you can't, but you know best. And so the questions go on, and through it, Job has a fresh experience of who God is. He realizes how little he knows, how much God knows, and through it all he gets a fresh perspective onto his circumstances. And he's never ultimately given an explanation for what God did. We don't know whether he ever understood what we're privileged to see in the first chapter. But having seen who God is, he says, I can trust you. I have to trust all things and know that you know best. I lift my eyes to you, says the psalmist, to you whose throne is in heaven. We need to lift our eyes and get a fresh sense of who God is, a fresh sense of how dependable he is, a fresh sense of how much we can put things into his hand. So there's desperate times, there's dependable help, but thirdly, there is dependent expectation. See in verses 2 and 3. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of female slave look to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. So the psalmist is waiting. He's waiting on God. He's waiting expectantly. He's waiting prayerfully. There is a dependent expectation. Now, we don't like waiting, do we? Because it usually means we've got expectations that aren't being met. And why can't someone hurry up and get on with it? Well, the illustration used in the psalm here kind of helps us. It says, as the eyes of slaves look to the hand of the master, there's a slave-master relationship. That's more servant rather than as we think of slave in terms of the sort of American context. The eyes of servants look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female servant look to the hands of her mistress. Again, the servant-mistress relationship. The servant follows the master's instruction. The servant respects his or her master. So there's no impatience, there's no back chat, there's no chivying up, there's no complaining about work conditions. So our eyes, he says, look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. He's waiting till he shows us his mercy. Nothing seems to be happening. So in verse 3, he's pleading again, have mercy on us, Lord, have mercy on us. But he's waiting on God, waiting on God's timing. See, our problem is that we're in a hurry. We want the quick fix, and we want it now, and then now, and then God, we want it now, please, now. If you read your Bible, you'll realize that God is never in a hurry. God doesn't have to be chivied up, but his plans are not tomorrow. Abraham is promised Isaac. It seems impossible, and he waits 25 years for it to be fulfilled, during which time he goes down the blind alley of Ishmael, thinking that somehow God needs some help. But 25 years later, God's promise is fulfilled. You think of Joseph languishing in Egypt. You think of him languishing in prison 2 years after interpreting the baker and the butler's dreams. God wasn't in a hurry. He had his time. He waited his time. And often God's timing seems to go right down to the wire. Why doesn't God intervene sooner? Esther chapter 6, verse 1, those famous words, that night the king couldn't sleep. As the Jews face the prospect of being annihilated, what is God doing? It seems to go down to the last possible minute, and it's only the night before that the king couldn't sleep. We've looked at the book of Acts lately, and so much of the book of Acts is about the result of those who have faithfully worked and waited on God over many, many years. There were years of synagogue work that had taken place as these Jews who had been scattered through adverse circumstances set up and ran synagogues and won proselytes who were either God-fearers or God-worshippers. With the work of John the Baptist and Bob midweek drawing our attention to that. How many of the things in Acts are built on the foundation of the work of John the Baptist, where he saw none of the fruit from it. And the years, of course, of Jesus' ministry, where at the end of it, just a handful of disciples and no more until the day of Pentecost. All of them waiting on God, waiting his time, serving as they went. See, we too have to be in things for the long haul. As a church, we need to be in it for the long haul. There's no quick fixes for churches. We have to be in it for the long haul. As the eyes of slaves look to the hand of their master, as the eyes of a female slave look to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God till he shows us his mercy. So what does waiting on God actually look like? Is it just sort of, tapping your fingers as you wait patiently? I used to hear the phrase a lot. It used to be used in a sort of slightly super spiritual sense, and you could never quite understand what people meant. What does it mean? Well, waiting on God is humble, and it's submissive, and it's dependent. We're looking up to the one who is enthroned in heaven. If you say you look up to someone, usually means there's an element of respect, of trust. So we look up to God, to the one who can help us, to the only one who can help us. Do we believe that? Do we believe that as individuals? Do we believe that as a church? Are we bringing our needs to him humbly and expectantly? Or are we effectively just asking God to rubber stamp our plans and frustrated that he doesn't seem to be doing what we want? So you see the slaves here, the servants, looking to the hand of their master. The eyes of the female slave looking to the hand of her mistress, looking to God's signal, submissively, humbly waiting for the Lord. And so we should be praying more in terms of, well, Lord, what should we be doing in this situation? Lord, what are you trying to teach me through this? Lord, how should I react to this situation? Lord, how are you wanting to mould my character through this? It's very different to some of the prayers that we often pray. You will see also here that waiting on the Lord is not just a passive thing, but they are serving. It's using the image of servants who are serving their master. And so we faithfully serve God as we wait. We don't just sit down and do nothing, but we serve and we leave it in God's hands and we leave the results for him. Waiting on God is also expectant. They wait, it says, till he shows us his mercy. It's expectant. The psalmist didn't just come along on a Tuesday night wanting a nice prayer meeting. He wanted answers. He needed answers. He expected answers. I wonder how many times we've gone home from a Tuesday and said, oh, that was a nice meeting. Probably never thought about it again. If we are really brutally honest with ourselves, sometimes answers to prayers are like a sort of bonus extra that we didn't expect. Is that it? Is that us? Is that you? Is that me? It's certainly been me at times. We haven't really gone home with that expectancy, that need, that desire that God must answer our prayers. And waiting on God is also prayerful and persistent. Again, it's not just sitting waiting, but it's prayerful and persistent. Have mercy on us, Lord. Have mercy on us, he says. He's continuing to bring that need before the Lord in persistent prayer. You'll no doubt all remember the parable Jesus told of the man who has a friend comes to him late in the evening and he's got no bread to set before him. So he goes to his friend, and by the time he gets to his friend, it's midnight. And he goes, psst, 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 hey, can you help me? Can you help me? And the chap looks out his window and he said, well, who's that? Oh, it's you. What do you want? It's midnight. What do you want me to do at midnight? Shove off. Go away. But the man won't go away. He won't go away. And Jesus says, I tell you, even though he will not get up and give you the bread because of friendship, yet because of your persistence, literally your shamelessness, he will surely get up and give you as much as you need. Are we persistent in our praying? Do we really care about the things that we're praying for enough to be persistent in asking and seeking and praying for them? Have mercy on us, Lord, have mercy on us, for we have endured no end of contempt. Waiting, humble, submissive, dependent, waiting in the attitude of a servant, still serving and about the master's business, waiting that's expectant and looking to the Lord to provide waiting that is prayerful and persistent. Dependent expectation. Maybe as an application, we need to take that attitude into our week of prayer as we look forward and all the things that we desperately need God to help us with as a church. And say to the Lord, our lives are looking to you till you show us your mercy. Will you pray like that? Will you wait on the Lord and seek him? And will you do it with yourself for your personal life as well, and things that matter to you and things that are on your heart? Desperate times, we all face it. But as a Christian, we have help, we have dependable help. We have a God that we can turn to. And we should do it in dependent expectation as we wait upon him.